All right. Welcome to SMarketPlace Live, where we talk sales, marketing, and rock and roll and delve into all of the elements of marketing and sales that you can really capitalize on if you act like a rock and roll band. And we talk to experts in sales and marketing, hear what they do, learn their lessons, and then we wrap up the show with an exploration of their rock and roll story. So I am really excited. We have Tom Dempsey and Sarah Noonan, uh, my co-hosts and producer, and it's great to have you on.
Great to be here, as always, with both of you. Um, Tom Dempsey and market share growth experts, and always love doing this with you both. Thanks.
Yeah, this has become quite a thing for us. All right, Sarah, we're going to let you run the ship here while we go. Thank you. And let's, without further ado, bring on Laurel. So this is a demonstration of our Publio Studio and the podcast ecosystem and all the content we can create from these. And we welcome Laurel and look forward to creating a bunch of content with you.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Absolutely. This is the second time you've been on our podcast. You've helped Publio with some of the ways that we talk about ourselves and helped us explore our brand. And we've done some content together. So tell us a little bit about Pearl Consulting and what you do, and
Sure.
welcome.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's great to meet you, Tom and Sarah. And of course, I know you, Keith. I am Laurel Carpenter. I am the co-founder of Pearl Consulting NYC, and we are brand strategists and copywriters who help purpose-driven entrepreneurs to find the magic in your message. And so what does that really mean? We help those highly specialized entrepreneurs. It could be a fractional CMO, an HR consultant, psychotherapy practice, a small purpose-driven law firm. We help you find your voice and sing to the right audience. And I have a process called Reveal Your Brand. It's a signature process that it's a really fun way to dive into your values. It's based on brand archetypes. It's a custom approach that can involve anything from client interviews to a brand questionnaire. It's customized for our clients, and it's just a really fun way to figure out how do your values intersect with your customers' values and what are the right words you need to reach them. So that's what I do.
Take customers through it and maybe even tell us a couple case studies about how you integrate the archetype with how they talk about their business. And then
Sure.
And the last part is, how do you help people change the way they talk about something they've done for a long time?
That's a really great question, actually. Well, I do want to talk about my why a little bit first before I do that. So when we started our business, we've had to pivot a number of times to change our own messaging. So it's like, rather than being, oh, we have this process and we're such experts, we've made our own set of mistakes. And I want to acknowledge that because I think it's important to be humble when you're building a business, and it can be hard to do that. And it's not encouraged in the marketing world. We heard a lot of advice from big marketing gurus that were working with larger brands about how to run our business. And we bought some unsatisfying courses and some good ones, but we didn't always feel great about implementing that advice. And so I would say that we see a lot of struggles for entrepreneurs and small business owners to figure out what marketing is going to work for them and feel good. And we learned through our own struggles that messaging is really at the heart of everything. And we wanted to help other people whose values interact with ours in some way, help them find like what's magical about their message and not do things that make them feel uncomfortable. And I think there's a fine line. Sometimes you do want to get a little uncomfortable, but you never want to feel like what you did is unethical or doesn't feel good to you. And there's a fine line with that. There's innovation and there's, doing all of those things. So I feel passionate about this because I would say that we actually worked with a couple of coaches ourselves on finding the magic in our own message, and we continue to work on that process. So we are not exempt. We follow our own processes and have developed them over time. You were asking about some case studies. Well, one of my favorite examples that was recent is I now have a partner in our business. I'm part of something called Humanize Collective, and Charlie Birch is a creative director, and she and I had worked together on several website copywriting projects where she provided the visual direction and I did the copywriting. And she brought a client to us, a psychotherapy practice where the owner was very intellectual in her messaging and used a lot of academic language on her website because she has a PhD. And we never want to dumb things down, but we also want to speak to the actual clients that she's trying to serve. So we use a lot of the language that her own clients use in the messaging, and that was one way that we changed it. And so I'd say one of the key takeaways for a small business owner is to really listen to what language your clients are speaking to you. What are they saying? And use that in your messaging, because sometimes we need someone outside of ourselves to reflect our own genius and our greatness. We don't necessarily always know or can see what's the most valuable thing about what we offer to other people. We often need to, I'd say, either have it reflected back by a third party or one of our clients. And like that's part of what we help people with, is kind of getting outside of themselves and being like, your client said that, they had never met a therapist like you before because you were a real down to earth person. Why don't you use that in your messaging? And sometimes people are worried about, seeming overly conversational, but we really encourage, that particular client actually went all in on being more conversational, and the tagline ended up being real therapy for real people, which worked really well for her client base, who's often afraid to come to therapy, and they're the therapists next door in their community. So that worked a lot better than more academic language about I have a PhD and more stiff like credentials. And we still did talk about their credentials, but we led with more of the, that we've been in this community a long time, and I grew up here, and I know, I've even known like some of the people that have walked through the doors, and we have a whole team of therapists that understands what it's like to be in this community. So that's one case study that I could give you an example of. And another is, and I would say she was very purpose driven. She really wanted deeply to help and serve the people in her community. A different example that I can give is a fractional chief marketing officer for law firms that we worked with for the last 2.5 years. And the original assignment was to help her find her voice. And she saw a LinkedIn post I had made celebrating a client win that we had worked with, and she really liked it and approached me about working together, because she also felt that her messaging was very corporate and stiff, and that's what she'd been trained to do in her days in corporate. And so, but she actually had this great sense of humor and sort of a lighthearted energy, and one of her archetypes was the sage, which is intellectual, but also the jester. And she said that the process we went through with her gave her permission to lean into being a little bit silly in her copy or coming up with some lighthearted phrases. And so anyways, that we still work with her, and now we actually help her with her LinkedIn content, and we have a whole content strategy that was built out of the messaging process. So what we do is not just intended to be a one-shot deal or just for the website. It's actually intended to be used for everything, whether it's your LinkedIn posts, other social media, your elevator pitch. It's a multi-purpose process that benefits all aspects of marketing. And I feel really good about what we have created, and we can, and just like, I'd say we continue to pivot, we continue to evolve our own ways of working with clients based on their feedback. So we've created several custom processes for clients. We even have a private language immersion school we're working with right now, where we interviewed a whole bunch of their parents about their perceptions of the school, because the founder of the school is having a hard time divorcing herself from the more academic language that they were using. And that's an ongoing process, actually, that integrating the, what are we going to take from this and how are we going to meld it with what we had before, or without losing like the integrity of the intellectual quality of the messaging. And I would say we have a lot of clients who are Sage archetype in some way. I think there have been 7 clients who've had Sage in their archetype triad. We create a triad for people so that we can draw upon all 3 of the archetypes that fit. And I think, Keith, you might have been creator, sage, hero, if I remember correctly. So oftentimes I think that when our clients hear what their clients have to say about them, that can help them feel more comfortable with making a change in the messaging. Although it can take some repeated feedback about that before some people are comfortable making a change. To be real about it, it's not always, people don't always immediately agree to make that change. So I hope I answered your question.
That was a very thorough answer for sure. Lots of sound bites in there for us to work with. I can relate, having worked with you. I didn't go through your formal process, but we did some early stage work right when I was starting, and I come out of IBM and Apple and big companies, and there's a protocol, and I found it really hard to step out of that. And here we are 2+ years later, and we have a show that's sales, marketing, and rock and roll. I mean, we've really let our hair down, and that's a journey, and it's hard to let go. So I commend you not only on being able to nail it on the front, but then helping your clients to integrate that in all forms of their business. Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, yeah. One thing that struck me that you have said is that it's brand voice copywriting, right? And if I elongate that, tell me if this is accurate, but you give a unique voice to brands through creative copywriting for a multitude of services, websites and bios and email marketing and blogging, LinkedIn, resumes. Is that a accurate and fair description?
It is, actually. You got it. And that makes me happy because I feel like we're finally nailing our own messaging.
Oh, good.
That makes me very happy. So like a lot of things we create for our clients, we could be a value proposition, mission, vision, taglines. We even create a brand dictionary for people, which is very important. The word choices can be very important. We had a whole big debate with one of our clients about like the phrase global citizen versus global future, for example. Like that is like the word choices are really important. So, and it's helpful to test them. I know not everybody believes in message testing, and I don't think you have to go too crazy with it, but I do think it's important. Like we did focus groups with parents in this private language immersion school to test taglines, and that gave us so much like feedback about what words resonated with them and what didn't. And they were very particular, actually. It was like they had evaluated so many other schools, and anyways, I think that might be helpful in terms of understanding what we do. There is a physical deliverable of a brand deck, but it's really, in the end, a lot of times people feel peace of mind because they got message clarity, and it's not a one-shot deal. You can use it. And we've gotten feedback before. Sometimes we create a bunch of taglines and people will say, like parents don't like the word transformation, or we get some very specific feedback when we test, and then we change, we iterate, we evolve. I hope that's helpful as well. So, but Tom, I love what you said. That makes me so happy.
Oh, good. No, those 3 words really resonated with me, and I am really curious about the process of creating a unique voice for a client, because they're all unique in their own ways.
Right.
Is it a lot of dialogue with them? Is it researching, their websites and anything that they published, or how does that work?
So our process actually it does not end with a brand persona quiz. And I would be happy to share that with you if that would be helpful. I can, share a link to that. And it's something that we created in response to a lot of client feedback, and it helps you get a baseline of what 3 archetypes seem like your values. And honestly, there is, like, for some people, those personal values are maybe what we use, but after conversation about the results, like, so for example, we're sage, magician, and creator. That's our business. So we're predominantly sage, then magician, which is like more like charismatic and find the magic in your message, for example. And then we have creator, which is that we really want to think outside of the box and help clients create new ideas. So we start with the triad, and then we have a lot of conversation with the client about what resonated for them and what doesn't, and what do they want to use in their business brand. Because for some people, there may be some, in particular, coaches where the personal brand is really, really important. But sometimes our clients might say, well, I'll give you an example. We had a client who got the jester archetype as one of his choices, but actually when he tested some more of his humor with clients, it didn't go over so well. So we ended up leaning a little bit more into his ruler persona, which is quality, and about the quality of the videos that he makes for people. So we start with a quiz. There's a lot of conversation. I do a deep dive into the website. I look at client testimonials. I look at LinkedIn profiles, all the social media stuff. I look for consistency across messaging, and a lot of people are trying their best, like, to create that, but maybe inconsistency across messaging is something I see a lot. So what we do is we have a lot of conversation. I have a lot of questions. I ask people everything from, what are your superpowers to, like, why do people, why do people care about your business so much? What feedback have you gotten from clients? Who are your best clients? Who are your ideal clients? And we do a really deep dive into that. We don't just focus on, like, this person is 26 years old, drives a Lexus, and goes to Starbucks or something. It's actually more about the psychographics and behavior of those clients. So we talk about ideal client profile, and ideally those clients allow us to interview people, some of their ideal clients, and we find out what they have to say. And that's actually usually one of the most helpful parts of the process. We do a deep dive into competitors. We look at anywhere from 3 to 10 competitors. And when people ask me who their competitors are, I say maybe a competitor is even someone that is a friend that that sometimes they get the business and you don't, and that's okay. But they don't have to be, like, it doesn't have to be adversarial. But we definitely do a deep dive into competitors. We look and see, like, is there a gap that person can fill in the marketplace? And it's all of these things get combined into our magic in your message. And so Charles, my partner, and I have a brainstorming session. We create a brand deck for people based on all of this information that kind of filters down. And we end up having a collaborative working session with the client where we present it to them. We give them some time to think about what we created, and then they come back to us with feedback. Sometimes it's immediate, like, I love it. I actually find that a lot of times the more visceral reaction is, like, the one to go with, because if someone immediately loves it or immediately hates it, I think that's a pretty good sign of the heading in the right direction or not. And we iterate. So it's a combination of the quiz, competitor feedback, deep dialogue, our own dives into the website, and the client listening piece. So
that's a great description of a process, and I've actually seen the results, so it's fascinating to hear your approach, and always evolving.
Do you find that there's ever a disconnect between an individual, let's say the VP of marketing or even the CEO, between their personal voice and the voice of the company, so to speak, like branding?
Yes, I would say that, like, a lot of companies, especially smaller ones, the voice is shaped by the person that founded the company. Yeah. And we did work with a small law firm that was changing from a longtime founder who was more of a citizen, a good neighbor. He told a story about a head of a bank losing his wallet, and he didn't know the person was a head of a bank, found it on the street, returned it, and that was his first client, which is a great story. But then the new person that was taking over was much more of a rebel, and he wanted to work with crypto. And like, there is this, the team had to have many conversations, which we helped to facilitate, about where were they going to land in the space between the citizen and the rebel, because that's a pretty big difference.
Right.
Because the changing face of the business was they wanted to move away from the founder's really safe approach to a more risky approach, but they weren't ready to go 100% rebel. Rebel is one of the harder archetypes, I think, to use in a law firm. So there is a lot of conversation that has to happen, and sometimes, you know, maybe the new person's point of view wins, but hopefully it's a team effort and that there's the voices of the team are heard. I do find that it tends to be one or two people at the top whose voices tend to be the strongest. I'm not going to lie about that. So like maybe the new partner's voice is going to be like, you know, heard, but maybe a lot of people are really hanging on to the old way. And sometimes you have to bring people slowly along the path. You might not, that iteration may be something in between. It may not be like 100% the new thing. So
a
I've come to accept that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
A lot of that gets expressed visually. Do you tell us how you then interface and bring this foundational work that you do to a visual standpoint? Do you work with various design? What's your model for working with design?
So these days, my preferred model is actually to start the project with my partner, Charlie Birch from Humanize Collective, who is a web designer and visual designer who is now the creative director of a collective that she and I, along with some other folks, have formed so that we can work on projects holistically from the beginning. It is not the only way that I have worked with clients on a project, but I generally prefer to be able to bring the messaging work that we've done to the visual person and have them understand something about our process or be willing to listen to that process. It is more challenging to do that when the web design, let's say the web designer is 100% SEO focused and is not at all like into brand voice, or they don't know a lot about it. That can be a clash at times. And I'm not saying that, you know, I have worked with SEO specialists before where we integrated the two things, the SEO part and the brand voice part. But generally these days, I prefer to start with the brand archetype quiz with my partner, Charlie Birch of Humanize Collective, because we are aligned on the archetype approach and we're actually developing a brand new assessment process together where we can start from the beginning, like with clients, and lay out that identity and already have some people lined up for the visual pieces right out of the gate. Because we're all aligned, it's a lot harder to work. I have had a situation on a project where I always want to be open to working with new people, but we had a client, maybe our second client for Reveal Your Brand, who'd already chosen the web designer, and the person didn't want to speak with us. And she insisted, like, you have to fill out my template. And we ended up having to make major changes to the copy we'd written to fit the template. And I don't think that serves the business owner. I think I am a copy forward person, of course, but I do think you have to listen to the visual people, the SEO people, but it's good if you can combine from the beginning and align together as opposed to fighting each other. And that can happen sometimes. I'm not going to lie, but I really prefer to work from the beginning on things with Charlie, if possible, if not with a web designer I have previously interacted with.
So you are able to then in sync bring the ideas visually. I think that the words and concepts and relative to the market sound like the place to start, and then bring in these tools that you have, like SEO, like visual branding, and the concepts behind the brand that now you can partner on in your mutual process. It'd be great as you work on that to have the two of you on and have you talk about it on our show.
Oh, Charlie would love that. And we'd have our own, every Wednesday, we actually have a conversation about our process with each other that we record. And So that would be great. We want to expand that. And brand archetypes are great to talk about, but I also find that like there's a whole spectrum of things that go into these decisions, and including the market, the competitors, what's changing with even like now with Google with the algorithm. I was so relieved that on a recent project, an SEO specialist I'm working with was like, well, the algorithm is changing, and you don't just keyword stuff anymore. And I was like, oh, I love you, thank you. I'm so glad that.
That's important. They're emphasizing, I'm going to get on my soapbox here, right? They're throttling emails that are not adhering to privacy and security. They're not scanning websites that don't have that have poor content. They're emphasizing brand content, and the whole idea is to get into a mode where you have an opt-in audience for what you do, right? And so we want to make what I see happening is industry wants to make the online experience as secure as your cell phone, and they're putting it on content creators to attract an audience today. So it starts with the brand, but then there's the execution of the brand and the content strategy that go behind it, because you have to build an audience. And that's why I really believe that where we're ending up is going to be connecting a show like this to your customer audience, right? And having an experience that people want to participate in. So I think we're entering a new era, and it's no longer about stuffing keywords.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. You also can't be totally like, it is true that sometimes you have to use certain keywords on a website, but there are creative ways to do that. And I want to mention, I worked with a wonderful SEO strategist named Lindsay Slachetka of Adjust Media. And we worked together on a project a couple of years ago. And recently when I got stuck in a situation with a brand new but well-meaning SEO strategist who had given us all of this feedback about our copy, that she helped me negotiate that situation really well, so that we ended up with something that worked for everyone, because I felt that her strategies are very up to date. Like staying up to date with all of this stuff can be challenging, and it's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to come on the podcast and talk about it, because I've also thought about this with music, but that's maybe a little later in our conversation.
We're about to get there, but I've been in the room with those conversations, right? Where SEO, things like SEO, technology things, there's multiple approaches and there's different factors to consider. And sometimes it gets down to a really push me, pull you conversation to get it right. And as I had a manager once say to me early in my career, that the emphasis is on the wrong syllable. And you've got to get people in line with what our business objective is, and not be a purist about something like SEO.
Yeah. Well, our business has had to pivot significantly actually in the last couple of years, and focusing on brand voice and messaging has been what we have done. But we originally started out, my partner Charles was a journalist for the New York Times, and a former colleague of ours hired us to blog for his MSP, managed service provider, like providing help desk, white glove help desk support for small businesses. Charles had been a tech person, programmer, help desk support guy. He's great at fixing computers too. I always joke with him that maybe we'll do that someday if copywriting ends up getting gobbled by AI entirely. But hopefully that won't happen. But we found that in the blogging market has changed significantly. The pandemic and the last few years, a lot of people are choosing to use AI for blogging. And even though it's not, I have my own feelings about that, but we just found that the pricing and the opportunities for blogging just were not there the same way they were before the pandemic and before AI came on board. So it's one of the reasons that we ended up pivoting our own business. And I think, I'm very glad that we're at branding and messaging, but there are some people who would argue that AI can do this, that, you can get an AI to create your brand voice. I have not personally found that most AI programs are doing a great job with brand voice at this point in time, that you are drawing upon this database of all of what's been done before. So when you feed your AI, like what examples of brand voice, you may end up not getting something that's really satisfactory. And in fact, Charles did a funny experiment where he asked ChatGPT, and I know ChatGPT is not the only program, to write like Tom Waits, Jack Kerouac, and Charles Bukowski, and it came out with almost exactly the same thing for each of those three people. But there are definitely differences in the way that each of those very famous writers and songwriters communicate.
Yeah.
And I felt that AI didn't capture that too well. So it's the same thing with small businesses. I think people are often, when you're using AI to create brand voice, you're ending up with a lot of what came before you. The you factor tends to disappear. But I'm going to be really honest and vulnerable and say, at some point, the AI can really do a good job with brand voice. Where is that going to leave us? I don't know. And that's something to be determined for the future. They're not there yet, in my opinion. You may have opinions about that, Keith. I know you're into AI a bit more than we are, but I've been giving this a lot of thought.
You know what? I love this conversation, because I think you and I kind of entered it at the same time and with different perspectives. What I've learned is that taking a recording like this and using AI to explore it as a topic and to generate source content is an amazing process. Now, I think the reason it works, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this experience with you so we go through it together. But the reason I think it works is that these are your ideas that we're going to pull upon, right? We're going to dive into this conversation we're having right now about the pros and cons of using AI. And the AI models that I've built use this conversation. And you can ask it different perspectives out of the same transcript, right? Talk about this element, talk about this element. And it just brings back ideas so that when I do the content creation, when I do my writing or produce the video, I have more information, more perspective to create something of quality. So I see it as a tool, just like spell check. I couldn't spell when I got out of college, and all of a sudden I had spell check, and it never was a problem before. This is spell check on steroids, but I will never put anything out that I'm not proud to put my name on. And I've had research assistants, and I look at the way I use AI and use source content that's my own. I have a research assistant to help me do that, but it's my content, it's my writing, I'm responsible for it. So that's how I approach it. And I don't like putting out things that somebody would say, oh, that was written by AI. So that's kind of how that's been my standard.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll be, here's a chance for us to collaborate as we approach putting this into a blog and creating LinkedIn posts, which are two of the primary things that I do. It ends up on YouTube. We have this thing called a podcast ecosystem, where this conversation we have is now going to be on multiple channels. And so that's where I find it helpful, is in the post conversation, whether it's a roundtable or a presentation or an interview or a customer case study discussion. All of those are legitimate sources of content, and AI can help. So kind of, I'll toss it back over to you. That's kind of where we're starting from over here. What are your thoughts going into that?
Well, so we use AI to summarize as an advanced thesaurus. And I'm actually going to be taking a course with this woman named Elise Bennon, who has a business called The Marketing Mentor. She is teaching people how to prospect using Perplexity and other AI tools, which I'm it was very reasonably priced, and it's a risk for me to do that. I just decided, why not give it a try? Why not see what it can do? So we're not refusing to use it, but I want to make it very clear and reveal your brand. That's all we use AI for. We actually choose not to use it for first drafts. We don't really use it for generating people's brand voice. If we are needing more word choices or phrases, we may use that. But honestly, we have to amend it so much even when we ask for it. We've asked it generate taglines before. We've never used a single one of those taglines. I think like we've had to change it, but maybe it came up with a word like that we didn't think about. So like we worked with a client last year. They were a steel manufacturing company, and the AI came up with the word durable, which we had not considered in tagline. And the tagline the client chose had the word durable in it. So even though it wasn't the one that ChatGPT had created, we did use it as a thesaurus to come up with alternatives that we then manipulated based on what we know about the client. So that is a use that I find it helpful for those things, but we haven't embraced it for anything beyond that at this point. So
well, this is going to be a fascinating conversation, and we will collaborate together and learn from each other.
It's always fun collaborating with you, Keith, and I love your questions, Tom. I think you asked some really great questions, and happy to answer more if you have them. So.
Thank you.
Well, I think we should talk about rock and roll.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Tom
Right.
Rowan. Just real quick.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Tom and I met a couple of years ago now, almost, and on our first follow-up coffee, we found out that both of our first concert was Boston in 1978, and we love rock and roll, and we started exploring this idea about businesses today need to think about having a creative product like a band, like a rock and roll band, right? They sell merch, they license material, they put butts in seats at concerts, they have live streaming. So they have product that they have to sell, and they use a creative process to do it. And we found this just a great vehicle to get a conversation like this going with you. You've been very generous with your thoughts about branding, and I know there's some great stuff here, but we want to know about your rock and roll experience as well, your bands, your concerts, and I know from being friends with you, you got some rich stuff to share.
Yeah, so one of the reasons I wanted to come on the podcast was actually because I was thinking about how much my own journey with music, not just rock and roll, but other kinds of music too, has evolved in the last few years. So I grew up in upstate New York and Burlington, Vermont, and my first concert was Bryan Adams because it was the 80s, like 1984, and it was like a social thing. It was a friend thing. We all went to see him, but growing up in those areas, like the band that was like actually one of the most popular bands was the Grateful Dead, and I was really into them when I was in high school and college. And I remember seeing these two friends of mine one day, like on the bus, and they were going off to see them at the Saratoga Performing Arts Center, and my parents wouldn't let me go, and it was this whole big thing. So I ended up actually getting really into them when I was in high school, I went to see a lot of concerts, that the ones I could see in Burlington at that time. Like I lived in Plattsburgh and in Burlington, which are across the lake from each other. So I saw Bryan Adams, I saw Echo and the Bunnymen at Memorial Auditorium. But the craziest story from that time, well, I'll save my craziest story for a private conversation, but my second craziest was seeing U2 on the Joshua Tree Tour in 1987, because a girlfriend of mine and I went up there. We were 17. Neither of us had access to a car, so we took this classic radio station's bus up there and saw them. And we talked a security guard into letting us on the floor, even though we had these way nosebleed seats at the old Expo Stadium, which I don't even think exists anymore. There's no Expos anymore. But we got on the floor, and the whole crowd was bouncing up and down. It was almost dangerous, but it was like we could just feel the energy, and like the edge came out, and we got really close to the edge, and he was playing, and like it was electric. And that friend and I are still friends, and we talk about that experience like every now and then. We're like, remember when we went to see you too and we got on the floor and all of that stuff? That was really fun. But I would say that, so in recent years, I taught dance part-time, and I had some students who were like, you know, you might want to consider like some new artists and checking out some new music. And I love Beyonce. I love the Renaissance album. I used it in my dance classes. There's a lot of R&B artists that I really enjoy listening to. One of my favorite more modern rock bands is the Alabama Shakes with Brittany Howard. I think she is awesome. And I think it's important to evolve your musical tastes as well, to be open to new things. Like I'm going to be really honest. You guys may disagree with me. I'm not a huge fan of the Dead and Co thing. I think it's just not the same for me as it was like back in the day with Jerry Garcia. I did see the Rolling Stones too, by the way, Keith. But I feel like nowadays I'm really trying to expand my musical horizons and going to see artists that, you know, I saw Lizzo last year. She's a great performer, amazing performer. Beyonce show is incredible. I did get to see Brittany Howard in Vermont at Shelburne Farms, and she's an amazing vocalist, just so good. And I want to go see like more modern music, and that's kind of where I'm at these days. And my students influenced me. They influenced me a lot. So I allow myself to be influenced by them. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned a couple bands that are Tom's and my favorites. It's we'll let Tom weigh in. He just came from seeing the Dead and Co 3 times at the Sphere in Las Vegas last week.
That's cool.
Last
yeah.
Week. And I too share your love of the Grateful Dead, but I evolved probably because I was jonesing for some great Grateful Dead music into the Dead and Company, and it's good. It's great music, and nobody fills Jerry's shoes, of course, but John does an admirable job with guitar work and even singing. But I wholeheartedly agree with you. You've got to evolve in everything we do, from a business standpoint, from a musical standpoint. It's so easy to get stuck in a rut, and I think most people identify with the generation that they grew up in high school and college, maybe, 5 to 10 years after that. And then it sort of cuts off. I've seen that so many times with friends and acquaintances and people I know, where they're stuck with anything that is earlier than the 90s or the 80s or whatever it happens to be. There's a whole world of music, all different types of music, that will blow your mind and open your creativity and everything else that goes along with it. So I'm in agreement with you.
I want to recommend something, actually.
Tom, we'll have to share.
Sorry. I was going to say that.
We have to share that one of the videos you shared with me.
Oh, which? Here, Laurel.
You shared a couple of the videos.
Oh,
yeah, I want to see the video, but I will share with you that. So I saw the Broadway musical Illinois, which is based on the music of Sufjan Stevens, and it was incredible. I think he's one of the best songwriters of his generation, and I think that album it was based on is incredible. And I got into it because a friend of mine, not one of my students actually, but a friend of mine who was really into indie rock in the aughts was like, you got to hear this guy, you got to hear Sufjan Stevens, you have to hear his music. And I really loved it. And I think he's a great songwriter, and the show was awesome. And it's aimed at a much younger generation than me. I'm a Gen Xer, but I thought it was such a great show, and very heartfelt, very soulful music, and really like encouraging people to express themselves and their creative energy. And I think that like a lot of younger folks are really resonating with that message, and I think it's important. So I want to recommend seeing that show if you get a chance to see it.
Thank you.
So what about this video that you're talking about? I want to hear about that.
I assume you're talking.
Well, we'll put it in the in the blog post.
Oh yeah. Okay. There was some
Right.
that you
Yeah,
everybody's heard
Tom,
about.
you'll allow me,
Yeah.
I'll put it in the blog post.
Yes. Everybody's heard about the Sphere, but I'll tell you, it is a absolutely sensory overload, and the band looks very small compared to the screen inside the Sphere that goes about 3/4 of the whole thing. It's just absolutely fantastic at 18K resolution. It would bring any band to life and gives the audience, more importantly, a more sensorial type of experience, rather than just being in the nosebleeds trying to see the ants that are playing music. You can actually see so much of what they represent, and close up, of course, when they're playing. So anyway, if you get the chance, you find somebody that's in residency that you like, that's the way to go.
Wow, I would love to see them. I know some friends went to see you too at the Sphere. Another friend saw Fish at the Sphere. So,
Yeah.
Yeah,
at
they
some
were
point,
there.
I will definitely go. I know I have a friend who's trying to talk me into going to Vegas with her on a girls' trip, and she was like, "We can find out who's at the Sphere."
Hey,
So
just give Dead and Company a try. That's all I'm going to say.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. It's kind of like I also think that maybe I could be just like with AI. It's like I don't ever intend to adopt all of it, but I do think it's important to be open to some new things.
Yeah.
And so, like for me, this is like heresy for a lot of people, but like I think she's a very talented person, very talented woman and songwriter. But Taylor Swift is not really for me for the most part. Like I like Karma. I think that's a good song. I know I think she's super talented, but I find a lot of her music a bit generic. But people keep saying, "Well, give this a try. Try this song." And I have found music that I like of hers. I don't hate her. I don't have anything against her, but I, generally speaking, choose to listen to other things. So it's funny. Charles and I are talking about this. We're like, there's a New York Times reporter solely dedicated to talking about Taylor Swift, and it's funny because one of my friends is Danielle Hughes, who did a whole blog about her experience going to Taylor's concert, and I said, I was like, I'm not saying this because I don't like her, but it's just not for me. And people attacked me, and
It's
I
a
was
very
like,
personal thing.
sorry, it's personal.
Oh, yeah. That's
Don't
right.
attack me for not liking something. Like you probably, lots of people don't like the Grateful Dead. That's fine. Like you don't have to like them. I don't have to like Taylor Swift.
Right.
So it's okay to take the things that work for you and the things that don't when you're innovating, and that may require some experimentation. So
That's right.
That's right. And this is exactly the level of conversation that you need to be having with your branding, right? And not everything is for everybody, and it's a very personal thing, and you've got to be able to implement it. And so what we're talking about, really just to wrap this all up, is the process of what you do, and that bringing creativity to some application, right, that then is going to become a business, is very much like what we're talking about for the personal taste in music.
Yep, absolutely.
That's right.
Yep, and some approaches are not for everyone. Like our archetype approach, it may be not for everyone. It may be for other people, and that's great. We always want to find the right fit with your values, your clients' values, and where do they intersect. And if they don't, that's okay too. So.
We had a fellow on a couple of weeks ago who talked about, in his content development, what he tries to do is align the brand archetype with the ICP, the ideal customer profiles, and look at the alignment between them. But we're running out of time, but this has been, I could talk to you for another day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It is great. I love having these conversations. I think this podcast format is great for you. And I really like how I think there's a great relationship between the rock and roll or music and branding and marketing. It's a great idea. So
thanks. We've learned from you.
Excellent. Yes. I hope so. I hope good. I look forward to more collaborations, of course.
Well, I think a great starting point is to share how we process this with you, and let you go through the experience. And we'd love your feedback because of what you do. Like, how can we improve, right? But I think that we want to deliver the Genius Bar of podcasting experience, and look forward to your feedback. And for everyone else out there, we'd love to hear your comments and thoughts about this.
Great.
All right.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Sarah.
Sarah,
Really?
that's right. Thank you.
That's right. Really enjoyed the conversation, Laurel. Thank you.
Yeah, me too.
All right. We'll talk soon. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us on SmarketPlace Live, and have a wonderful day.